Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining on this lovely warm day in UK. Hopefully you're enjoying the sunshine and are in a nice, comfortable, air-conditioned office or sitting next close to a fan. We will begin in a couple of minutes. We've got quite a few registrants for this, and we'll give them 2 minutes to start, 2 minutes to join before we start. Those who have joined, let's make a start. We've got quite a few things to cover, and I'm sure we'll have more people joining as we go along. Thank you, everyone, for joining. This is part of our webinar series, and today we'll be talking about AI pilots and what are we seeing in the market, what are we seeing the challenges, and how do we think a simple operating model can go ahead and address that. We'll cover why do pilots stall. We'll cover two different modes. This we think is one of the big challenges we see. So, what is these two modes causing, and what conflict are they causing? We'll talk about a model, a simple model. There are more complicated ways of doing it, but simplicity is the best. What do we want to propose? And then we'll go through details of what that model looks like and how you can bring it all together. We're joined by John Davis, the CTO at Village Hotels. John's a massive industry expert and has been leading organizations. Village has been there for 5 years now, and he's been leading how the entire ecosystem works. And they're quite advanced in terms of technology and adoption, and hence his experience will hopefully be very valuable to all of us. This is just covering up what is the organizational resourcing model looking like today, where originally we started with just people and people could do everything. We then introduced computing applications and that changed people's role into doing more of the data entry and the adherence to the process, but the application was the one that was ensuring the standards. That still left gaps, put pressure on people. We then started automating these using digital workers, and digital workers were rules-based engines that could execute any number of steps without losing focus, and they could do it 24/7. They were still limited that the input had to be rules, the processing had to be rules, but real world didn't work that way, and there was still a lot of variation. So that was a challenge for automation before AI came in. AI has technically existed. When we talk about AI in this particular instance, we're talking about the new version or the latest version of AI, which is using large language models. And what that did was the LLMs made it extremely easy to start doing free text input and output, which enhanced the capabilities of what we could do with automation. Because even when we work with automation, there were still elements of processes that we couldn't touch, and AI then gave us the ability to go off and automate those. And then expanded into the world we see today, which is agents. Agents, in a very simple way, are AI combined with tools, where we can then give AI a goal, and it can decide how it goes about using the tools that we give it to then achieve that goal. So a very simple example is, find me a duplicate customer. So we say, here's the system, here's how you access customers in it. I want you to go off, try different scenarios of how a duplicate customer might exist, and tell me whether I have duplicates and which ones are duplicate. So today, when we think about organizational resourcing, we really have to think about, we need to understand all 5 of these different modes, but also understand which one should get used where. So the challenge with pilots, with ChatGPT, AI became extremely accessible to everyone. There's a very simple, from free to very cheap models of entry. That meant that pretty much everybody today is using AI in some shape or fashion. But when we look at organization, we're thinking enterprise AI, we still see very few enterprise AI success stories. And the gap between the number of pilots that happen and the number of successes that happen is pretty high. So when we see a pilot, what we're talking about is a limited use case or a limited deployment but nothing where we've closed the shop and said, this process is now handed over to AI. So it hasn't really reached the rare, it's staying at a demo well, but it's not reaching a stage of it can actually run the business. A few of the challenges you see, one, there's no owner. When we go to AI and enterprise AI, there has to be clear ownership, and somebody needs to say, I am responsible for the output that this AI is producing, and I will work with whoever I need to work with to make sure that it's reliable. There's no path to production. When we're doing pilot, a pilot is working on a limited data set, but to then say, I go from 100 transactions to 10,000 transactions, it's a very different ask that we're making. And that path to production needs to be thought of as a part of the pilot. There's a lot of excitement, and we see a lot of leaders coming in and saying, I want AI, we need to be doing more AI, we need to be doing more agents without understanding it, or being clear of the value that that particular AI will generate. The number of issues that we're seeing that where these we tend to stall. And if you look at any one of these, they're not really a problem with AI. They're about how we adopt AI and what we are using it for. So it's really an operating model problem, not a technology or a solution problem. So we're going to go back. We're going to go to John at a few places through today, because we know that Village has successfully seen some of these issues and tackled them. And hopefully John's experience and some of the real world practical insights that he can bring can add more color to this. One of the big challenges we see is differentiating between assistant and autonomous AI. Assistant AI is actually what we got hooked onto when we start using ChatGPT or Claude or Copilot. That is, in a way where we go to AI and we type in a prompt and we get back a response. We type in a prompt again, we get back a response. Or we're using Cowork or something else, which is letting it interact with my application. The key part in all of that is me. AI is acting as an assistant to me. The ownership stays with me. If I present the output from it, I am the one accountable. I can't go in and say, well, ChatGPT produced it. When we go to an enterprise and we go to autonomous mode, that changes. There is no one person that you can go to and say, get made a decision. The AI has become an enterprise system, and the accountability shifts to the organization. It is being called in every single transaction. We're passing lots of data into it. We're getting lots of results back. We can't sit and monitor every single transaction that takes place. So we need to make sure that there's auditability, there's observability. What it's doing is very tightly bounded, and anytime we're changing the model is also well managed. Two questions that we tend to ask is, if you had unlimited tireless robots, what would you give them? And that's an example for automation. And if you had an unlimited capable intern, what would you give them? And that would become a good place for AI and agents to come in. John, going to turn to you and get your experience here. How do you see users understanding the difference between autonomous and assistant AI, particularly at a senior management level, who are driving the AI agenda?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's difficult because you've got, I think you mentioned it earlier, we have some of our senior teams and business leaders that ask the question, can we do more AI? And they don't see the difference between the two verticals there. I think the way we framed it very early on was, is this a role enhancement or is it a role replacement? And they're the two things that we start with. So are we enhancing our employees' day-to-day lives? And that's where we would be looking at that assistant level that you were talking about. Or are we replacing workflows? And that's where we become more autonomous. So as an example, when we launched Gemini into the business on a trial stage back end of last year, it was very clear early on that deploying even an assistant mode on an enterprise level is very, very difficult, because although it is difficult, we still want that assistant to be answering questions the same way. We still need it to be in the village tone of voice. We still need it to be making sure that if 50 different people ask the same question but slightly different, that they're getting the same answer. If we're talking about data and we want certain types of data that we've got our Gemini agents bringing back into the business, whether that's GM level or regional or senior, they need to be the same figures, right? So even though it's an assistant, there's a governance around there. There's guardrails that need to be put in place. And I think some people see assistants as the easier way to deploy AI. And I think maybe in the beginning it was, because it was very clear understanding from our end users that they use ChatGPT in their day-to-day lives. It was a big hoo-ha around it. I can ask it a question, I could get an answer. If I need to enhance a presentation, I can do it. And that's quite an easy back and forward. What we very quickly realized was that actually, when you're deploying it, the end user still has to ask the question. And if they're not asking the questions, then it's just another tool that sits in the background that no one's using. On the autonomous side, obviously, there's a lot more governance around that, and there's certainly a lot more focus around the costs and the credits. And like you've got in your presentation, we've got a lot of data going through there, a lot of decisions that aren't always 100% correct, and that it's certainly a much more difficult way to sort of drive AI into the business, but actually the benefits are massive. So it's sort of really understanding that landscape and being able to explain it to the end user is absolutely vital. And I think the two are very quickly meshing together, because whereas assistant mode in your day-to-day life is fine, I can ask it to do my shopping list and stuff like that, it's amazing. But actually, as we're bringing it into a corporate world, assistant or autonomous, we're actually now seeing that a lot of the infrastructure, a lot of the governance is the same, and we need to be absolutely crystal clear on all of it. So we sort of pitch it enhance or replace, but it's all becoming sort of under the same model.
Yeah, you actually bring up a very good point. When we've been seeing assistant and when we use it personally for our individual productivity, we never actually ask it the same thing twice. We'll typically ask it to do it once, and next time it'll be something else. When you're deploying assistant and enhancing even at an organization level, and you have two people in the same roles in two different parts of the business, asking the same question, getting back different results, it doesn't work. So at an enterprise level, even assistant mode really needs to be thought of autonomous mode to get that consistency in.
100%. And if you're asking in your day-to-day life to do a shopping list and it gets one of the things wrong, it's not an issue. You still keep using it, you still go back to it. Actually, if it's in your day-to-day life and there's a line of data that's wrong, or one of the responses is incorrect, actually confidence very quickly drains, and that's when you start seeing the issues coming out.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that. Let's move on to a very simple operating model. What we see working with AI is it really needs to be a loop, and there are 4 stages that need to be considered in it, and each one needs to have its own governance and its own management around it. So first is identify the right problems to solve, assistant versus autonomous, or as the way the Village Hotels is thinking about it, enhancement versus replacement. Secondly, you've got to think of testing. How do you make sure that it's safe, it's reliable, and it's consistent? Third, for deploy, you've got to think of how will it scale in production. So how will we go from the pilot volumes to production volumes, and what John's talking about, and what we call as metering, software you buy, AI you meter, you've got to consider the cost of that scaling as well. This is a big area where people get wrong. The models that we're seeing as individuals being sold to us, the commercial models that are being sold to us, are not available to enterprises. At $20 a month, I can go in and consume as much of ChatGPT as I like, but that model is not available to you when you're going to be deploying it in autonomous or an enterprise mode. So you've got to think of the token usage, and whether in some cases we've seen if that process is even worth automating at a transaction level, because your costs are going to be considerably higher than where you are today. And the last one is you do have to continually monitor it and make sure that the results you're getting are still consistent. And this needs to be more of a consistent testing pipeline that sits along with your AI. So you can't just deploy, like with enterprise systems, once you test it, it's going to run the same way every single time. AI has to be continually monitored. And wherever there's a difference, that then goes back into a loop of we've now got enhancements that need to happen and they need to go through the whole testing and deployment cycle. John, in your experience, which part do you think gets underestimated the most? I'm probably giving you a difficult challenge here to pick one out of the
they're
four.
all with their certain, all with their individual challenges, but I think the one that I think traditionally everyone underestimates is the monitoring piece. I think where you look at any type of project, especially with software, when you're trying to deploy into a business, it's always been traditionally very linear. So we've got a start date, we've got an end date, and when we get to the end date, everything should be rosy. When actually it's always been a loop. And that monitoring piece and that constant updating and that continuous deployment is absolutely vital in terms of making sure that what you're doing is being enhanced constantly. There's no end to this. It's a circle that's just going to keep going round and round and round as technology gets better, as new models come out. You will start seeing more efficiencies as you're monitoring. You start seeing more opportunities as you're monitoring, and then putting that back into the workflow is super important. And I think that's the part that people that gets underestimated. It's the one that nobody budgets for. But it's a part that really determines whether you scale or stall. And that's why I think that future vision of actually we're going to continuously be doing this is absolutely vital.
Thanks for that. And the other challenge we see is trying to put a governance, a management rhythm around this is a balance between pace. So you could, for example, do every week, let's do an update, but that's not enough for the results to come in. And before you know it, management's losing patience saying, we've had 4 meetings, we've got a month, why don't I have the results? I can go to ChatGPT, type in something, and get a result in 5 seconds. So how are you balancing the need for pace, the desire for the ambition for doing things faster versus the reality of some things take time?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's that stage one that you've got in your sheet here, the identification of it. I think, I mean, we've worked together for a long time. You know how Village work; everything's at pace. But we've got to be very conscious that, like you say, things take time. So we very clearly define that at the beginning. If it's something that we're doing that's customer facing, the cadence of this loop going round and round and round is much quicker than something that might be an internal process, or something that might be an assistant process that we've got time to sort of assess and re-engineer and drop back in and test a little bit more and then monitor again and keep going around that loop. I think if it's something that's customer facing, that's very difficult, because if there is a critical issue that you've deployed, then it needs fixing. If there's something that's going to make the guest experience better, then it needs fixing. And we've got to be very conscious of that. So the cadence of those meetings, those decisions, that engineering time is much, much quicker. And we identify that at the beginning because we know business critical versus non-business critical. Actually, something that is really important to us, but actually is on the back office, actually the cadence will be much less than something that's more customer facing.
So you're taking a risk-based approach to and adjusting the cadence for the cycle based on the risk.
100%, yeah.
Okay, very good. So identifying, and if you get identified right, chances of success go significantly higher. The belief we see in a lot of places when we have a conversation is they believe that AI can solve everything. It's a dream we've been sold, but reality is that the right solutions or the right problems have to be tackled using AI, and they've got to be tackled in the right way. So first of all, we've got to look at value. And we underestimate the piece of value. And value, when we look at it, is it has to be in the task that is being automated, not necessarily the process. Don't think of AI as I'm going to give it invoice processing and let it handle it. What we have to look at is I've got this element of invoice processing that is complex, that needs AI. Let's go understand the value that that particular part has, evaluate the cost the business takes for it, and then decide to go for it. And also look at the risk associated with it as well. Like John was saying, if it's customer facing, it's a higher risk one. You've got to be more careful than something that is internal. Don't go just on executive excitement or I want to use AI. We do see a lot of AI being used in places of, oh, I can go to Claude and I get it to write an agent for me. It's not as easy as that. Do it at a personal level, absolutely take accountability. But if you are going autonomous, make sure that you've got the right governance around it. Secondly, decide whether it's going in assistant mode or autonomous mode, or as Village is doing it as enhance versus replace mode, and then adjust the governance to that accordingly. Adjust the momentum. That if it's a high risk one, or we need a quick win on an assistant, then yes, go through at pace. If it's low risk, go through at pace. If it's high risk, do make sure that you are putting due diligence into it. We can't go back if something hasn't worked and there is failure. We can't go back and blame AI. That failure has to sit with us, and ensuring we don't fail is a way of succeeding. So do think that through, and also set a kill criteria that if these things are not achieved, we will stop. It is easier to decide upfront what that criteria is, then go into what is typical loss aversion. We've already spent so much money. Let's spend a bit more money and hopefully we can turn this around. A simple framework we use for identifying whether you have an automation gap, whether there's glue work, that's people acting between connectors between systems, there's no value add. One of our customers called it swivel chair integration, where people are moving data from system A to system B. Whether it's rule-based and automation, or whether that's with a bit of interpretation, either way, there's very little value add. It is more interpretation that's going on. If there are workarounds where systems ended and we thought they were going to work in a certain way, but reality is that they don't, and we've implemented workarounds which have put higher pressure on human workforce. The third is error factories where mistakes are happening. We see this very typical with scenarios such as large data entry, big orders that need to be typed in. You might miss something, big updates that need to be made. They are what we term as error factories. Bottlenecks are the ones we do see the most. And bottlenecks are where the process is not able to put through the transaction volume that the business needs, and there is work piling up. You then do a workaround and you say, let's focus on the high priority ones rather than the low priority ones. We'll get to the low priority ones when demand is going to be lower. So bottlenecks are constraining your growth. And the last one is the invisible tax, where you've got highly skilled people doing tasks which they don't necessarily need to be doing. A classic example of this is report preparation, where you've got very senior, very experienced people collecting data from various places to produce a report rather than having a report available to them with some commentary, some analysis that they then work on and actually do the interpretation of. Score that into a nice, simple framework. Assess the business value, assess the ability to deliver, score it at a scale of 1 to 5. It'll give you a simple 2x2 matrix. You'll identify some quick wins. They can go through quickly. There'll be some strategic bets which are harder to deliver, but business value is high. Then there'll be things which have higher, which are harder to deliver but lower business value. Those are what we term as fill-ins. We use fill-ins when demand on the first two are low. At least we want to keep some momentum so we can continue to work on the fill-ins. And the last one, which are hard to deliver but low business value, those we say just park it and be aware of them, but you don't necessarily need to do much on them. So score each one on a scale of 1 to 5. The criteria for doing it is in front of you, and a slightly more detailed criteria. We would always recommend that adjust this criteria to each business. And once you've done the scoring, and you've got your idea matrix in, then that's how you go about and decide what needs to get done. Okay, John, you've been through quite a few projects, and quite a few have been successful, and some that you've killed as well. Give us an example of where of things that you had decided upfront, said, if this happens, we're going to carry on, or if this happens, we're going to kill a project.
Yeah, I mean, I think like you said at the start of this section, that the most important part is that those first sort of 4 areas, really looking at value, feasibility, data readiness, and risk, right? So being very prepared at that stage and having processes around when it doesn't work, we're ready to finish this. I think you can very quickly get into a downward spiral there where you're chucking good money after bad. And I think that when we're doing projects like this, the thing that kills more projects than anything for us is data readiness. I think that when we're looking at value, it's very, very easy to say, this is going to save me money, this is going to make me money. The feasibility is, can I do it or not? And most of the time the answer is yes. Most things are possible now. But that data readiness piece is ultimately where our projects live or die. If we're not confident that the data is in a good enough place to be able to build layers on top of, then we either don't start, or we'll start and test and kill it very quickly if we realize that there's an underlying issue. Because we are very, very conscious that we want our data infrastructure to be bulletproof before we start building anything on top of it. And we've had multiple instances over the last 12 months where we've looked to deploy, whether it's stuff with Agentforce, whether it's Gemini, whether it's stuff in Claude, where we've dipped our toe in the water, we've seen the data's not there, or we need to do some work on the data. And I say kill the project, we've probably put a pin in projects where we've said, right, we've got to go backwards here. And we've got to start from the bottom up. So as an example, we wanted to launch Gemini Enterprise into the business probably October last year. And that was more on the assistant side. Very easy, just enhancing everyone's day-to-day work, whether that was sitting in their Drive, in their Gmail, calendar, managing diaries, stuff like that. When we started to look into it, we actually realized there's terabytes of data in Google Drive, and some of it's probably not categorized properly. So we went back and we then did a whole security thing that took us about 3 or 4 months to make sure everything was tagged in correctly. So if someone was then questioning data, they were looking to interrogate it, they could then go back in and we could be very confident that Gemini would work as an assistant, but wouldn't be revealing any sort of sensitive data across the business. And we sort of launched it at the beginning of this year. So we do not just take risks and jump in 2 feet and then find out at the end that, oh, we've got a problem here. So it's super important that you get that done in the beginning.
The data piece you mentioned is actually quite interesting. One example we had was we thought we could use past data to train a model and then use that to replicate what people were doing. What we came across was people are actually more inconsistent than we would like to think or believe. And when we analyzed data, we said, this is no way this could be used to train an AI model and saying, learn from this pattern, because it was just so inconsistent. So we actually had to wipe the slate clean. We then hit a challenge when we came to testing it, because we were going back to the same users and said, so we wrote a framework, said, here's how the decision making should work. We've trained an AI model on the back of it. But now who do we go to for testing that model? We had to go back to the same people, but they were inconsistent. So we got stuck in this loop with them saying, we can't go back to people and work on it. Very interesting. That brings us to the next section of how do we test, deploy, and monitor. So do define hard success metrics. And with hard success metrics, do also accept a level of tolerance with them. So if you set a success metric at it should handle 80% of my cases, don't pull the plug if it's at 79%. Right? 80% when we went in is also 79 is as good as 80. If it is 75, assess the business value and then decide whether it works or not. If it's 70 and below, then pull the plug. Okay. So define success metrics, put some acceptance thresholds as to what is good and what is not good. Test on real data and real workflows and edge cases. When we are deploying AI, the edge cases, getting even one wrong, even if it's an edge case, will potentially cause issues and lose confidence. So do test all types of scenarios and have a way of handling it. It might be you turn around and say, I don't want AI to handle an edge case, but you still have to be able to identify it and pass it to a human to handle. If it's going to work in an autonomous mode, the bar and the criteria you said definitely has to be higher. Let it work in shadow mode first, then do human in the loop trial and have fail-safe behavior before you let it loose. And lastly, do the whole workflow, including how does it hand off to human? Where do people step in? Don't just test the model independently. End of the day, the model has to fit into the business and what the business is doing. So John, can you share your experience of testing an autonomous system that you've done it and how you went about validating it, some success criteria, examples, not absolute ones, and before you decided to let it loose?
Yeah, I mean, I think that when you look at, I mean, we've gone through one very recently of our voice AI for our sort of call centers and sales teams. It's like you say, good enough. It's never just about accuracy. It's about where are the off ramps, because we know that there's not going to be 100% success on everything that it's doing. The most important part is if it's not successful, what happens next? And I think that when you're talking about volume and when you're talking about, especially on the customer side, millions of phone calls a year, actually, if you're saying, well, 80% is successful, yeah, that's quite good. But actually, that's 200,000 phone calls a year that are not successful. What's happening to those? And they're not small numbers. So it's, I mean, I want to see the failure modes before it gets signed off. I want to see where the off ramps are, how quickly we're getting to those off ramps. We don't want to frustrate people. And that's absolutely vital before we go anywhere near live. I think looking at when you're, again, if you're looking at removing human agents from the call center and they're only handling the 20%, I think there's, you really need to have a really strong testing plan, and a really strong cadence in terms of how that feedback is coming back into the business. It's very easy to do when you're an internal team and you're working on autonomous processes and you can sit next to each other and you can work through them and you can see where the problems are and you can have that conversation. When it's customers, it's very, very difficult because it's emotional. Someone can't get to do what they want to do. The first thing you hear is the complaints. And when it's a complaint, it's very, very difficult to then understand actually where is the issue lying? Why is the customer not happy? Why didn't the off ramp work? And we have to be ultimately ready to really learn. We're talking a few times a day in terms of listening to calls, understanding what went wrong, being able to deploy fixes for those daily in that sort of cadence. And unless I'm confident that that is happening or that can happen, then we wouldn't deploy. Good enough is that for me. It's like we're in a comfortable position that we absolutely know this is not going to be 100% successful. But actually in those 20% of scenarios where it's not, I'm confident that we can fix them quickly. And we're going to know where they are and we're going to see the data in terms of where sometimes we're seeing that data and we're seeing those failures before our customers even send anything or an internal person even send anything. Wow. And it's been able to pick that up early.
Did you find that if you have 20% of calls coming into humans, did you find that the skill level of the humans that it goes to needs to be now higher because they're actually dealing with the more complex problems or the more complex scenarios that actually could not have been automated?
I think from a skill level, we were confident that we had the right teams in place that they could pick up anything. They were already working on most of these cases anyway. I think what I was very conscious of at the beginning is that what ultimately happens is the human ends up dealing with the worst parts of those communications, those interactions with customers, because we don't want autonomy handling, whether it's a complaint, someone's not very happy, and that ultimately the off ramp is straight to a human. So what you find is actually the volume of calls that the humans actually listen to becomes a lot more negative than it was before. They're not having the nice interactions, and it's been able to balance that. We don't just want them to be there as someone to be shouted at all day. So we have to be very mindful of that as well. From a skill level, we were confident that our teams were already managing these processes, so that we were comfortable that they could do it. But at the same time, I think the learning curve for us was actually once you're being handed over from an agent, sometimes that initial interaction is very, very different, because a customer's already been through a process of talking to an agent. Actually, when you get to the human, they're expecting you to know everything already. They don't want to repeat themselves. And that's certainly been a learning curve for us in terms of how we're getting that data to that human that's then going to have the interaction.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. Very good. Very good. Thanks for sharing that, John. So scaling is really an adoption problem. And some of the things to think about when we're scaling is make sure that it gets integrated into the flow of work and is not seen as a separate tool. And some of the scenarios John's talking about, what are the off ramps is the term John's using. That's a good way of thinking about it. How is it getting handed over? How is it getting handed back? What's the information at handover that is getting exchanged? So think of the entire workflow. Even though we're looking to tackle certain tasks of a process, both the input, the output, the off ramps, the handoffs need to be thought of as well. Okay. Adoption is the real deliverable. So it's not just putting the system out there, it's making sure that it's getting used by your employees, by getting used by your customers. That has to be the real driver. If it's not, you're actually costing yourself money with the solution as well as with it spitting everything out. Third, take a state-based approach. Do build incrementally. Don't try to roll out big processes or big solutions that address large processes. So take tasks, automate them, make sure they're successful, make sure that they fit into the flow, and then go after other parts. So build that roadmap and think of tasks, don't think of complete processes. And the last one is monitor the costs and make sure that you've planned for it and you're monitoring it. And there are guardrails in place that prevent it from running off. One scenario that we typically avoid is the whole agent to agent interaction of you give the agent another agent as a tool, and before you know it, the two agents are having a conversation at your cost and running up a big bill. So plan the operating costs, plan the support model, plan the testing cycles, and make sure you're considering a nice enough time frame, assuming it's successful. Okay. John, any examples that you share with the group here about adoption and resistance you faced in adoption? Something around people getting different answers and how they reacted to it, or another adoption challenge. What do you think is you can share?
I mean, I think that, honestly, I think in deployment, it probably becomes 20% technical and 80% adoption. That's the balance. The building bit's actually the easy bit. The adoption bit's the hard bit. An agent that nobody trusts, it's got zero value to us. So we've deployed a few agents across the business where they are internal. So if we look at our Gemini data agent, it was a big build for us. We are a data heavy company. We rely on a lot of data and ways of working. So deploying a data agent was a big step for us. Like you said in the beginning, a natural language model where you could ask it questions and it would spit you out responses to those. And early on when we deployed in phases. So we had 20 super users, then 50, then 100. And what very quickly became apparent was, the first one was that it did give different answers depending on the phrasing of the questions. Although you thought you were asking it the same thing, it interpreted it differently. Whether that was the timescales it was looking at, whether it was the day, the week, the month, whether it was a department. So some people would say food and beverage, others would say pub and grill. You would then get 2 different responses to that. And the challenge is, how do you educate the end user to understand that this is a, going back to the loop, this is a loop. We are monitoring, we are always assessing how it works, and being able to take that data back in. Like I say, this is, I think we're all on the cusp of something that's completely brand new. There isn't anything before this that we've got to be able to reference in terms of that natural language search, in terms of people interacting with data very differently to what would probably the last 10 years been, oh, what a great dashboard. Dashboards are very easy. They all look the same. Everyone's looking at the same picture. I can click on a bar, everyone sees the same number. Actually, when you get into that language model, it's like, well, how do people ask questions? And that was the bit that we educated right at the beginning with our team and Neil, who sort of run the project. It was that education piece, that constantly educating the end user that, yes, this is a work in progress and this is what it's learning, and feeding back into the business what we were monitoring and changing was really important. And that cadence of communication was what made it successful. I mean, I think integrating into the flow of work that people already use is ultimately the key to success. So we've got multiple tools that we use that you would consider AI. And what we're very conscious of at the moment is, because we're trying to move at pace, we don't want everyone having 4 or 5 different tools and they're going to Google for this and they're going to Claude for this and they're going to Agentforce for this. It's death by 1,000 paper cuts. Oh, I don't know which one I'm meant to be using. Our staff are very busy. Ultimately, we're a hospitality company, not a technology company, and we have to be very mindful of that. So how do we get all of this good stuff we're doing with agents and putting it into the place where people are working? And that for us is the next phase of how this is going to be super successful for Village.
Yeah, quite. And I think one of the things you highlighted there of how people ask questions, that's a very valid point, because we're used to using computer systems that are deterministic. Give it the same input, we get the same output. With AI and probabilistic, how we ask it a question and how it interprets a question at that instance is quite key to determining the output it's going to produce. Because whilst you might have 2 different users asking slightly different questions, wanting the same result, even if they ask the same question twice, there are chances they might get back different results. And that testing cycle and monitoring cycle becomes quite key. Okay. So going back to the point, monitoring is it's a go live is a start, it's not the finish, and continually testing the results, getting feedback from users, and incorporating that feedback into the models is a very important loop that needs to be done. One of the common misconceptions around AI is it learns. It does not learn. And there's actually good reasons why it doesn't learn. The models are fixed. We retrain the models, and then we redeploy a version of that model. If it was constantly learning, we would constantly be having to test what it's doing and what its thinking is and whether there is drift that's happening. And that doesn't work. So we do a period, do a deployment, gather feedback, go back, refine, adjust, and keep going through the circle again and again. So do close a loop. When you are deploying, do think of how are we going to get feedback from this, whether that be it's logging the results it does, and we have a set of users who are given a special button that says failed transactions, here's what should have happened, that we then use for putting it back in, for retraining the model. And last, governance and audit trails. Audit trails are absolutely necessary. When you ask AI the same question, it will re-reason. With a human, the chances are that they're more, if I go to a person, ask it to do the same thing twice, chances are they're going to do it in a very similar way. With AI, there's no guarantee of such a thing. So putting in audit trails and making sure every single transaction that you're doing with AI is getting documented is quite important, because that's the only way we can go back and see what's going on. So John, example of monitoring, something that that surprised you in monitoring, and how you then tackled it?
Yeah, I mean, I think with monitoring, most people would tell you're looking at uptime, you're looking at this, and I think I think that's the least of the concerns with stuff like this in terms of like if it's not working, people will tell you very quickly. I think what
Okay.
sort of happens over the accuracy degrades quietly, and that's the bit you've got to be looking at. So looking at drift, unexpected behaviors, that's the stuff we're looking at day to day. That's the data that we're getting back in, because that's the thing that's going to really tell us if we're moving in the right direction or not. I think like you mentioned it, audit trails are super important in terms of this has got to be defensible to the people that we answer to. So every autonomous decision needs to be explained if we need to. And that's not us dying in data. That's what lets us move fast, because we know we've got that backup there. We have to be at any point able to go back and interrogate what's happening. And the other thing I would say about monitoring, the one that probably a lot of people that forget about or is talking to people that are using it. That's equally as important. I think we get into a very tech heavy data and this and that and metrics, and they're all super important. But actually the stuff that I've learned the most over the past sort of 3 or 4 weeks with our voice AI is actually talking to the call center staff, talking to the people using it, talking to people that are talking to customers that have got through to them. That's equally as important. And I think that's sometimes a bit that we forget, because we're so caught up in this world of AI and, oh, look at this metric, look at that metric. Actually, the best feedback we get is from our teams. They're the people on the front line. They're understanding what's happening. Oh, this has been brilliant. The customers love this. Or actually, this is a bit that they're moaning about. And that's when we start looking at it. And then we can go back into the data and say, actually, yeah, that does look like unexpected behavior. So as an example, we had 84 phone numbers across the business. We moved to one number, agent at the front of it. And that's just a triage agent trying to get people to the right place. And what we very quickly realized is actually a lot of people that were out there that were calling us are going through the agent. It was a new way of working for them, and actually they were going to the wrong places. And that's where we could then look back at the data and just go and listen to the call recordings. Okay, what were they asking for that the agent didn't understand? And that has been a constant reiteration daily over the past sort of 4 weeks. And we only learned that because we talked to the sales teams, and they're saying, oh, well, they just said it was easier before. Now, we know it wasn't easier before because we had this whole IVR tree branch where you had to select 5 for this and 7 for that and 9 for this. And it's 5 or 6 steps before you even got close to getting to a hotel. So it couldn't have been easier before, but that was a perception. So we have to go back and look at, why do people think that? And then we started listening to the call recordings, and they might have been asked to repeat themselves once or twice. And perception is reality. If I'm just pressing buttons on the phone, actually, I feel like I'm getting somewhere when really I'm not. But if I've repeated myself twice, that's a negative impact. Oh, this doesn't work. And we've had to constantly go back and reiterate sort of that sort of stuff and retrain.
Yeah. I think it's balance in the two. You've made a good point. What I'll add to that is audit trails in the world of computing don't cost. We actually underestimate the value of being able to gain insight from our processes and log additional information. So log as much as you can. Do keep in mind data protection, so we don't want to start falling foul of and putting customer names in there. That doesn't make a difference. We just need to know a transaction number. But do audit, do log a lot more, complement it with feedback from people, speak to people, bring the two things together to actually then inform decision making. So moving on, then how do you do this? So one, understand the difference between assistant and autonomous or enhancement versus replacement modes, and the different disciplines that it needs. Do build a model that works for you. Look at identification in seriousness. Put a framework in place and use that to make it. It doesn't have to be complicated, but it's better than not having a firm framework. So put a simple framework in. use that regularly, use it consistently, and that's the best way of making sure you're picking the right battles to fight. And do the test and deployment well. Different challenges to think of in each one. And the last one, monitoring, is probably the most important one. Make sure you're speaking to people. Make sure you've got audit trails that help you actually make decisions better. Okay. Be critical. Look at each one. So whilst you have transactions you're pushing through this and initiatives you're pushing through this cycle, review the model as well and make sure that you've got the models working and developing and maturing in your organization along with the different initiatives that it gets through. The more you put through it, the better you will understand how your organization works and what is needed within the business. And we can help on different things. We can help do operating model maturity assessments. We can do portfolio mappings, or we can put you in touch with an individual who will help pick specific use cases and help you identify whether those use cases are good, or even help you do an assessment of value or deliverability to it. So once you go to scan the QR code, or just drop your name in a chat if you're interested, and we'll follow up with you afterwards. Thank you, everyone, and we'll follow up with the next in the series shortly.